Boo! Well, I'm Chuck Willis, and as you can see on my presentation here, this talk is called Trends in Licensing of Security Tools. Sorry, I'm going to try to keep speaking into the mic. If you can't hear me or anything, just give me one of these or just say something. I want to make sure that you guys can hear what I'm saying, and I also want to hear what you're saying. This is meant to be an interactive presentation, and in a way it's good. We've got a small crowd here that we can maybe people will feel more free to talk a little bit about this, because I certainly don't intend to come up here and say that I have all the answers. It's really just more of a kind of my slides are going to try to provoke some thoughts from you all and give kind of what my thoughts on are as far as where licensing is going in security tools and what might be some problems with that. So anyway, as I mentioned, I'm Chuck Willis. These slides are a little updated from what's on your CD, so you can go to my website and download them if you want. There's nothing real substantial in the way it changes. And just in case you couldn't figure it out from the title, so what we're going to be doing is I want to discuss the trends as far as the kind of the changes that I've seen in licensing of security tools, and also talk about how that affects the security community. And I also want to discuss, how licensing could be improved if necessary. I mean, maybe you all think there's not a problem with what's going on, and also as kind of a secondary thing, I expect that maybe some of you all will learn something about security tool licenses, in that there's a lot of tools that I'm going to talk about that you think are free open source tools that really aren't. And again, this is meant to be interactive, so I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and I hope that you all will have some thoughts and share those with us. Just a few disclaimers here. I am going to talk about specific tools that have restrictions in their licenses, and this is not meant to be like just ragging on these people or trying to talk bad about people, but I just think it makes the talk much more interesting if you've got concrete examples to talk about rather than a bunch of abstract stuff. And I do think that the authors of those tools have done a service to the community by releasing them under the license that they're under. I mean, a lot of the tools that I'm going to mention could easily be strictly commercial tools that you have to spend thousands of dollars for. So certainly the authors are to be commended for what they've done, and also I wouldn't be talking about the tool if I didn't think it was a useful tool that people use. So I'm not going to be talking about real obscure stuff, I don't think. And finally, the licenses may have changed since I put these slides together. Licenses change all the time, so this is just a disclaimer there that stuff might have changed since I put this together. And you need to go out and read the license if you're going to use these tools. Don't just rely on what I'm going to tell you. Okay, so a little bit about me. I work for a government contractor. I don't work for, and the reason I say that is I don't work for a consulting firm or a software firm, which is who releases most of the security tools as far as companies. And then a lot of security tools are released just by individuals that do it in their spare time. So I think I'm a bit independent in that sense. I'm not a free software zealot. I'm not going to come up here and say that everything should be GPL, because I don't think that's the case, and I use commercial software along with open source software and all sorts of other software. And again, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. So, but I do think I'm a pretty typical security tool user. I mean, I use a lot of tools in my work and also at home when I'm messing around with stuff. And I kind of wanted to illustrate this to show that you guys, I think, are typical security tool users as well, but we're different from normal software users. I use both Linux and Windows. I occasionally use other Unix variants, but you can't say that certainly about standard software. Most people just run Windows. And also, I'm not a full-time programmer, so I don't necessarily have access to all the programming tools, Visual Studio and all that kind of stuff. And also, I can tinker around with stuff, but I'm not necessarily someone that wants to spend all day coding. But I compile tools. That's certainly something that we can all do. We can debug compilation issues if you've ever had to port something from Linux to Windows under like the Cygwin APIs or to BSD or something like that. I'm sure that's something that's pretty typical for people here. And I like to build little tools and scripts to automate things. I hate doing busy work, so I like to be able to do that kind of stuff. And I modify tools that if I download a tool from the internet or from something that someone has posted to a mailing list, I'm going to take it and start tweaking it if it's not doing exactly what I want. And I also like to share my tools and modifications with other people. So if I do something I think is cool, I post it onto a mailing list. So anyway, I wanted to just mention that because, again, I think this kind of fits everyone that's here, but it's definitely different than normal software users. So my motivation here was that I use a lot of security tools, as I mentioned, and I actually read the licenses, which maybe not everybody does. But I've actually been quite surprised by some of the stuff I've found. A lot of tools that I thought were open source really aren't, and a lot of tools that just have some very strange license restrictions that kind of surprised me. And over the years, I've noticed some trends that, you know, it seems like more tools are going to a more restrictive license. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. So here's a quick example here. And so SensePost's WIC2 tool, it's a Windows version of NIC2 kind of. It's got some other features actually that is built onto the NIC2. It does some recursion, and it's also connects in with the Google APIs and all that. So anyone here use that tool, find it useful? Yes, no? Okay, good. Are any of the contributors here? I definitely know they're here at the conference. I sat in on SensePost's talk earlier. I don't see any of them in the room here. Well, you're lucky they're not in the room, because if you look at the license for WIC2, you'll see that it starts off with the full GPL license, and then it adds this extra restriction that basically if you find the software useful, you're supposed to buy them a drink. So I expect you all to go out and find them after the session's over and make sure you live up to that. Excuse me? WIC2, it's a web application scanner, web server scanner. So, and just in case anyone was wondering, I don't think that's enforceable, but I'm not a lawyer, so you'll have to talk to your legal about that. Well, it certainly is a violation of the GPL in the sense of, well, it's not a violation of the GPL, but it's not the GPL. You can't say that something is GPL and then add extra restrictions onto it. I don't think the two really match. But if you notice the wording there, it says, you know, it's kind of vague in the wording too. So to be honest, it's probably a joke. So I don't think they actually expect anyone to do that. But it's just one of those little nuggets that you'll see sometimes in reading licenses. So just a little bit about the scope. The main thing I'm interested in when I'm talking about these licenses is being able to use the tool for what I want to do and perhaps modify the tool and be able to, you know, send those modifications to other people. So in particular, I'm not trying to take someone else's tool and build my own tool that I want to sell and make $1 million for. That's much more difficult as far as licensing. Obviously, GPL restricts that in a lot of ways. The BSD license or other licenses like that can allow that, but that's kind of a different issue for me. So that's what we're going to talk about. So let's start off with the trends that I've noticed. And there's quite a few of them here, but there's two kind of overwhelming ones that we start off with. And the first one is that there's a lot of great open source tools out there that are under an OSI certified license. That would be usually the GPL or a BSD license. And you all can read the list. I'm sure you've heard about and used a lot of these tools, you know, the Nmap and Ethereal. And the Metasploit framework is written in Perl. Almost all tools that are written in Perl are released under Perl's license, the artistic license, which is basically, it's an open source license, OSI certified. So I think these people deserve a lot of credit for what they've done. And everyone who's written open source software, contributed to open source software, that they've done a lot of great service for the community here. And I just wanted to say this up front to make so that when I start talking about all the other tools later, that it doesn't sound like, you know, everything's a problem. There's certainly a lot of great, truly open source software out there. But I do see that more security tools are strictly commercial. And when I say strictly commercial, I say that basically if you want to use the tool, you've got to pay money. They may have some sort of free version that allows you to download it and try it out for 30 days or on a certain number of IP addresses or something. But for the most part, it's a commercial tool. And unfortunately, those commercial tools restrict many of the things that security tool users want to do. And that's really one of the things we're going to talk about for this session is a lot of those restrictions. And so I guess I'll just kind of throw the question out there. Is there a place for commercial security tools? Do you guys think yes? No? Shake your head. A lot of blank stares. Well, I do. I don't, like I said, I'm not an open free software zealot. I think that there's a place for commercial security tools, especially when there's not an open source equivalent. If people are willing to pay money for it, then that makes sense. But my other question would be, should commercial security tools be licensed differently from other software? Yes or no? Again, more blank stares. And I think definitely yes. I think commercial security tool users are much different than other tool users or other software users. So I think that the license can allow the kind of things that we want to do. And some tools do have pretty less restrictive licenses. IDA Pro, for example, allows you to reverse engineer it, which is kind of funny because it's a reverse engineering tool. But I guess they kind of saw that that was kind of something that a lot of commercial software doesn't allow you to do. And also, if you look at some of the vulnerability penetration testing tools like Core Impact or Canvas, that those are commercial software that you have to pay for, but they come with all the source code. So you can go ahead and modify the tool if you want to, which is a nice thing, and it's certainly something that security tool users want to do. And the other kind of overarching theme that I've seen is that a lot of tools are released with what I call a custom license, which is basically somewhere between commercial and open source. So it permits some uses without cost. Usually it means that if it's for personal use or for non-commercial use, it'll say you can use it. But it usually requires either payment or something like that for something else. And it restricts some of the other things that we want to do that we'll get into later. And that's really what I'll talk about for the rest of this session is those restrictions and tools that have them. And just as kind of an aside, many of these tools that are kind of somewhere between open source and commercial are released by companies and not individuals. And that's because the companies have put money into developing this tool, and they want to use it. Either they're going to sell it to people, or they want people to know that it came from them, that they don't want other people releasing modified versions of the tool and that sort of thing. Yes? A bait and lure? How do you mean that? Mm-hmm. Oh, certainly. Some tools are like that. They'll have a more restricted version that maybe only works for up to a certain number of IP addresses or whatever. And even if you look at something like Nessus, which I'll get into more a little later, Nessus is a great vulnerability scanner, but it doesn't necessarily scale real well. And one of the things that Tenable, the company that is pretty much in charge of Nessus now, that they have some like web interfaces and other consoles that they'll sell you that allow you to manage Nessus scanners. So yeah, certainly it is part of it. It's really marketing is what it comes down to a large extent, that a lot of these companies, the consulting type companies, they release free tools because they want to draw people to their website and be able to then sell them consulting services and software and all that sort of stuff. Okay, so now let's get a little bit more into the specifics. And the first one is just basically that sometimes you have to pay to use these tools. And usually these are tools, like I said, that can be used for free in some situations, and then in other situations you've got to pay. And sometimes the license will say that the tool is for like personal use or non-commercial use, but it doesn't say anything about if you want to use it commercially, how to buy it or how much it costs, and there's no information on their website or anything. And that is very confusing for users. That it kind of, to me, it's like if you want to charge money or you don't want people to use your software for commercial use, you should make it easy for them to stay within the law. You should make it easy for them to buy the software if they want to buy it. And so that's kind of confusing. And also, here's some examples of that, and you can read through those. THC's Are You There and is a tool that requires permission. It doesn't, you don't have to pay for it, but it does require permission. And I lump payment and permission together because I kind of think that if you require permission for people to use it for commercial use, then you're kind of leading up to maybe you're going to start charging for it later. And it really comes down to the same issues. Foundstone's free tools are that way, that their license says it's for personal and non-commercial use, but it doesn't say anything about how to purchase it for commercial use. The registered plugins for Nessus and also the VRT certified rules for Snort are that way as well, that you need to register in order to be able to download these. Both of them use very similar business models in that the rules will be about 5 days out of date if you're going to use the free of cost version. And then if you want to pay, I think it's for Nessus it's like $1,200 a year. I don't know for Snort how much it costs to buy the immediate download, so that as soon as a new rule comes out, you can get it. And then another tool is HTTP Print, which is just a neat little web server fingerprinting tool. So anyway, any questions there? Any other thoughts as far as other tools that are kind of in this vein, or people think this is a big problem or not? I don't know. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, just for people who didn't hear that, basically the idea, I think what you're saying is that basically violating the license of these tools, that if it says it's only for non-commercial use and you use it commercially, that's the same as downloading Windows from the internet on BitTorrent or whatever. It's piracy, and the BSA can come after you for it. Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. And that kind of illustrates why I put this whole thing together, is that, in my job, I was downloading a lot of tools, and I wanted to make sure that we were following the license. I didn't want to get my employer or our customers in trouble. So, yeah, it's definitely one of those things that you need to be paying attention to the licenses of the tools that you're using. Okay. Another feature that I've seen in a lot of licenses is that more of them are restricting redistribution. And basically, that means that you can only get the tool from the author, that you can only download the tool from their website, which is fine, I guess, until the author disappears. If it's a company and it goes bankrupt, or if the author unfortunately dies or decides he doesn't want to deal with it anymore, it makes it difficult that maybe a friend of yours has a copy of the tool, but then the license says you can't redistribute it. So it's one of those things that it's kind of a gray area. It'd be nice if people would put in their license that if you're going to restrict redistribution, allow it if the case is that people can't find it from you anymore. And just some examples of those as far as tools that you might have used. The sysinternals tools are a lot of like little Windows tools that will show you processes that are running in that. People use them in incident response. NetStumbler actually restricts redistribution. And then again, the Foundstone tools, and Nessus and Snort plugins. So that's the next thing that I've seen a lot of is tools that restrict or prohibit modification and reverse engineering. And that's really, it's a problem because it prevents us from being able to fix the tool. That especially if the tools like Nessus, the Nessus plugins restrict modification, but it's just a script. You've got the source code right there. You could easily go in there and fix things if you wanted to, but the license doesn't allow you to. And some other examples of that: Cain Enable, and also the Foundstone tools again, and NetStumbler. This is, like you can see, mostly an issue with Windows tools. That if you don't have the source code, it makes it difficult. But some of them, like I said, Nessus, it is still an issue. And that's kind of the next issue, is that a lot of tools don't come with the source code. So if you don't have the source code, it makes it very difficult to make any changes. And it's not a license issue in the sense of it's not in the license, but usually these tools that don't come with source code also have a license that restrict redistribution or restrict modification. So it's pretty much the same issue again. And without the source code, it's very difficult to make modifications to the tool and improve the tools, try to fix them ourselves. A lot of times if you're using a tool on a client site and something's being buggy, or you're seeing that the output is weird and you want to be able to try to fix it, you can't do that if you don't have the source code. And also the source code is valuable just for learning purposes, that if you want to learn how this tool is working and how, what kind of protocols it's using, especially if it's some sort of like a vulnerability scanner or a pen testing tool, you want to know how is it connecting to the remote system? What exactly responses are we getting back? Maybe try to weed out some false positives and that sort of thing. Well, that's very difficult if you don't have the source code to know what the thing is doing. And obviously source code is also necessary if you want to port it to another platform. So if you've got a Windows tool that's running standard C++ compiled program, then, well, you've got to want to port that over to Linux, then that's really not possible without the source code. And even in some supposedly portable languages like Java and .NET, you'll a lot of times run into little issues between platforms that you need the source code in order to kind of convert things, especially if the original programmer didn't consider porting, that maybe they're using some Windows-specific APIs that aren't available in the .NET framework for Linux and OS X and that sort of thing. And again, this is mostly Windows tools, although occasionally you'll see it on other tools. I don't use Macs, but probably Mac tools have some of that as well. And here's a bunch of examples. And some of them, I'm not sure if it was intentional that they didn't include the source code. Some of them you may be able to email the author and get it from them. But these are just the ones that I saw that weren't readily available on their website. And some of the new ones here, Achilles. Well, Achilles is an old tool, but we haven't talked about it yet. Brutus, Sam Spade, and Odysseus. Achilles and Odysseus are web proxies. And there's actually a couple tools, fortunately only 2 so far, that require credit in the consulting reports. So if you use THC AMAP or THC Hydra as part of a penetration test or other sort of commercial consulting assessment that you're doing, there's actually a clause in the license that you have to give them credit in the consulting report. I don't know how many people actually do that or not. I don't know if I'm glad, like I said, that only a couple tools are doing this so far, because if it becomes real common, it could be real troublesome to start to remember, well, which tools did I use in this consulting, and trying to get all the credits in there and making sure the customer doesn't get kind of confused as to why you've got all this stuff in your report. So is that new to anybody? I mean, did anybody use that tool that didn't know about that? No one wants to admit it anyway. Okay. Well, another issue I've run into is that sometimes tools have a lot of these restrictions in their license, but then they kind of will tell you in mailing lists or other places that, well, don't worry about it. We really didn't mean that, I guess. And that's a little bit confusing. So sometimes in these couple examples, the website is different from what comes with the tool. So you download the tool, and inside the tarball or inside the zip file is a license that's different than what you see on the website when you download the tool. One example is THC Hydra and AMAP. The license is only slightly different, but there's a little difference in the, I think it's actually in the clause that I just showed you, that the credit is different. That I think one of the licenses, it says you have to include the tool name, version, and authors, and in the other one it says you only have to include the name and the version or something like that. And another more significant one is Foundstone recently released a tool called WS Digger. I believe it's a web services scanning tool, but don't quote me on that. The license on the website is the standard Foundstone license, which we've been talking about, which is very restrictive, personal and non-commercial use only, no reverse engineering, all that other stuff. But when you download the tool, inside the tool distribution is the Apache 2.0 license, which is an open source license, which allows you to do all those things that we want to do. So which license are you supposed to follow? I don't know. But from what I've seen when they announced the tool, that it's meant to be under the Apache license, there's just some sort of miscommunication on their website. Another example is that sometimes the author, like I said, on a mailing list or something, will contradict the tool's license. So when you have Foundstone's Hackme Bank and their Hackme Books tools are great tools to learn about web applications and do some pen testing against them in a lab environment and all that. But again, the license says that they're personal and non-commercial use. So I emailed them because I wanted to set it up on our internal network at my company. And they said, oh yeah, no problem to use it on an internal lab. That they didn't want other people going out and, teaching classes, which is part of, how they make money using these tools, because they put a lot of work into them, but they don't mind you using them, at work personally. And that's something another issue that I've seen is that, a lot of times people say personal use or non-commercial use, but they don't define that. And different companies have different definitions. I know it's not a security tool, but Google Toolbar, it defines personal use as if you download it yourself, it's okay. So I can use Google Toolbar at work as long as I install it myself, but my system administrator can't install it on every single machine. I don't know. It's one of those things that different companies have different definitions. So if you're not defining it, then it's hard to enforce it. And then another example is the registered plugins for Nessus. Yes, go ahead. Right. Right. Yeah, that's a good point. For if you guys didn't hear, he basically said that if, like the Foundstone tools, that they were written by people at Foundstone, but Foundstone owns the copyright. They're the copyright holder for those tools, so they decide the license. And the authors of those tools don't necessarily have the authority from their employer to waive that license or change the license. So you need to be aware of that as far as who actually owns the tool and are you actually getting permission from the right people. The registered plugins for Nessus is another tool that's a little strange because the license is very restrictive. It doesn't allow you to change the plugins or reverse engineer the plugins, which is a bit strange because there's some problems with their plugins. You know, they always have problems with false positives or typos in the descriptions and that. And nothing bad. It's just they've got 6,000 of the things. So inevitably there's going to be problems that show up. And they frequently have problems with versions of services that they're scanning. That, you know, when a new version comes out, they're going to give you back something strange that it's not expecting. So anyway, the license prevents you from making those changes yourself or distributing them. But on the mailing lists, the owner of Tenables, which I think is authorized to make this statement, said, "Oh yeah, no problem. You know, you can make changes to the plugins and you can post it back to the Nessus mailing list so that other people can see them." So that's another one of those things where it's like, well, who do you really follow? I mean, I would guess that, you know, if they've said that publicly, and I know people have done that and no one's gotten sued, so it's probably okay. But it's just a little confusing for the users that they really should straighten that out. And the other really big issue that I've seen is a lot of tools just don't have a license, that they are, you know, you just can't find it. And maybe it's I don't know. There may be, you know, some of these that I'm going to mention, maybe the tools maybe the license is in the tool distribution, it's just hard to find. I have seen ones where the binary that gets compiled or is distributed doesn't have any license at all associated with it, but if you look at like the comments in the source code files, it'll say, you know, this tool is under the GPL or this tool is under whatever license, which is really not sufficient. You're supposed to include the full GPL in there rather than just saying it's supposed to be supposed to be under the GPL. And then sometimes the tool is just not present at all. You know, you just can't find it. And this is also a big problem if you can't figure out who the author was. If, you know, maybe you've got an email address that doesn't work anymore or something like that. So then it's kind of like, who knows? And then the other thing is that a lot of times if there is a license, it might be there, but it's pretty incomplete. That it just basically says something real simple like, oh, use it for whatever you want or something like that. Well, that isn't really a full license in the sense of it doesn't talk about all the different things that we want to be able to do with tools and give us permission for it. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of copyright law is that pretty much if the license doesn't say you can do it, then you're not supposed to do it. And a lot of times this is a problem with small exploits and scripts and stuff that are posted to, I call them online forums here just to include everything, but mailing lists, news groups. You know, if you look at Full Disclosure or Bugtrack mailing list, hardly any of the exploits that are posted there have any sort of license associated with them. And again, it'd be nice if we could say, well, if you post something in a forum like that and don't include a license, it was meant to be, you know, in the public domain or something like that, but I don't think that's the way the law works. But again, I'm not a lawyer. Here's just some examples here. A BindViews Enum tool, I wasn't able to find a license for it. Hobbit's original Netcat, there was no license associated with that. John the Ripper, I think what happened was Solar Designer, the guy who wrote the tool, incorporated some other code that he wasn't sure about the license into the tool, so that's why there's no license, because he doesn't even know what the license is. But he has said that the next version, 1.7, is going to be released under the GPL. but I have no idea when that's going to happen. I mean, 1.6 has been out forever, so I don't know when that's going to happen. And some other tools that I saw on SQLsecurity.com has a lot of SQL tools that I didn't see any license for, and some other ones that we've already talked about. So, okay, where are we at in time? Okay, we're in good shape. So, do you guys agree that this exists? You know, I've talked a lot about, you know, I think more tools are going to this kind of more restrictive licenses. Do you guys agree, disagree? What's your thoughts? Yes, no? Yeah, go ahead. Right. The comment was that a lot of tools seem to be that it's almost like the bait and hook method that someone else mentioned. That they have like free tools to kind of hook you in, and then they try to get you to pay for other tools or a more expanded version or something like that. And definitely that's been the case in software for a long time. But in security tools, I think it's more of a recent trend. You know. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah. So I think it's important to know, these license issues are important, and I think bringing these to the author's attention and showing them that you really care. We've seen many cases where that's had a positive effect. Yes, I think that's definitely true. Just to repeat for people who may not have heard, is that the authors of the tools a lot of times will either clarify the license if it's not there, or they'll give you the source code. Usually if you can get a hold of them, they're pretty nice about it, and they like to hear that people are using the tools. And definitely that's one of my recommendations that we'll get to later on is, work with those people to see what the license is if it's not clear. But yeah, I agree. Yeah, go ahead. I am not a lawyer. I don't know. I would say no, just offhand, that, again, if someone posts something to full disclosure or bug track with no license attached, I'm assuming he means people can use it for something at least, but I don't know. I don't know. And that's actually something we'll get into in a little bit, but what's your thoughts? Yeah, that's a good point. Just real quick summary was that that there may be an implied license there, that if someone has released a tool where anyone in the world can get to it, either on a mailing list or a website, that you could make the argument that they intended for people to be able to use it for things. Again, talk to your lawyer, and it probably depends a lot on what country you're in. Yes. Yeah. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is that a license is similar to a contract, and just because you and I sign a contract doesn't necessarily mean that everything is enforceable. And I don't know all the exact caveats, but I know, for instance, I can't sign a contract saying that I'll be your slave for the rest of my life. That is not a legally enforceable contract. So, anyway. let me move on to another question. So, and I think we kind of covered this, but I'll ask it more specifically, is there a problem with this? And we have certainly identified a problem of, you know, if stuff doesn't have a license and it's kind of in limbo, that it'd be good to have some clarification there. But with reference to the other trends that we've seen as far as more tools requiring payments and permission for uses and all that, is that a problem for the security community? Yes? No? Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. And the quickly summary of it was that that some tools out there, even security tools that are restricting reverse engineering and cryptanalysis of them, that really causes a problem for us that want to be able to evaluate these tools and decide are they good or bad to deploy into our companies or to recommend to our customers and that sort of thing. So that certainly is a problem. Okay, next question was, well, what can we do to improve security tool licensing? I've got my own thoughts that I'll talk about in a little bit, but I just want to hear what you guys have to say. Anyone got any suggestions? Yeah, go ahead. Make a new license. Yeah, well, and that's definitely one of my points that I'll talk about later. Is that it would be great if people want an open source product, make it an OSI approved license. Don't make up your own license because it'll run into a lot of these problems and it makes it confusing for the users. It's hard, especially because of the nature of security tool work, that we end up using a lot of little tools to do our work. And it's a pain to be able to try to keep track of the licenses of all these tools and make sure that we're not doing something that we're not supposed to be doing. Any other suggestions before mine? Yeah, go ahead. Yes, that's definitely a good point. The point was that if you're buying a security product, or even if you're using it for free, but mostly if you're buying it, is talk to the authors or whoever tried to sell this to you and tell them you don't like the license. Tell them that you want a different license, especially for as much money as we pay for a lot of the security products. That it's amazing that the kind of restrictions that they want to put on what we can do, and the fact that people just accept them, and just kind of treat it like any other piece of software that they're going to, well, we just got to live with it. Well, no, you don't have to live with it, especially a lot of these smaller companies that are selling these things that, they want your business, and they're willing to make concessions, and especially if they can understand that what they're trying to restrict is really not, it's restricting what we want to do with the tools. And it really comes down to, I think, don't treat your users like criminals. If you're not giving them source code and you're preventing them from reverse engineering the tool, well, you're kind of assuming that, oh, they want to do something bad to us. Well, no, we just want to be able to use the tool is what it comes down to, and being able to use it in the most efficient way that we know how. Okay, I got 10 minutes left. Okay, any other suggestions? Okay, I'll run through what I have on here, and it's really just kind of my own thoughts. Feel free to disagree or whatnot. Few issues for tool users. Well, obviously read and follow the licenses. You can't just ignore the issue. And if you don't like the license, don't use the tool, or at least go back to the author and say, hey, can we get this changed? But don't just ignore it and kind of go on and do whatever you want. And I'd also say, I call it legal trickery, but just don't don't follow the letter of the license while violating the spirit of the license. And a lot of that comes down to how you define, commercial use and that kind of thing. If you don't get into that, it would be my recommendation. And again, work with the tool writers to clarify if there's a problem. And the key there is politely, because tool writers have a lot of times, especially if they're writing it on their own, they're not getting paid to do it. They have a lot of people emailing them with bugs and stuff like that, and you don't want to make demands of them, but just talk to them, and usually they'll be pretty accommodating. And also encourage them to remove the license restrictions, which is good for everybody. And also, if you make changes to a tool, whether it be an open source tool or any other tool, share the changes. Allow all of us to work together on these things so that everyone's not out, reproducing the same, events. Okay, well, tool writers, well, obviously you need to follow the license for any software that you're incorporating into your tool. In particular, if you've got like GPL software or something, you can't cut and paste that into a commercial product. Choose a license and include it with every tool. That's kind of self-explanatory. And remember, if the copyright holder can add another license at any time. So just because I release a tool under the GPL today doesn't mean that every version of that tool is always going to be GPL. I can release the next version of it under a completely different license. That's not a problem because I own the work. And if your employer holds the copyright, then encourage them to use a less restrictive license or just a standard open source license. That can go a long way to just telling your boss, hey, this is what what users are going to want to be able to do with this tool, and we think it'll be helpful in the long run. Because especially if the company is trying to release the tool as marketing and being able to draw people to their site, well, more people that use the tool, the better it is for them. Just a quick note of don't make some complicated restrictive license for a pretty simple tool. If it's a simple tool, just release it under a BSD license or GPL or something real simple, and also say what you mean and mean what you say when you're licensing the tool. Don't do this kind of, well, the license says you can't do it, but then I'm going to email people and say that they can. And again, if you want it to be open source, just use an OSI standard license. Don't make up your own. And if you're going to require payments, well, obviously you need to make the cost reasonable or people aren't going to buy it. Make it easy for the people to buy the tool, that they can find it on your website, that you've got a link, that people can go to a secure form, put in their credit card information, and download the tool. You're going to get more people buying it that way than if they've got to email you and try to figure out what's going on. And that's pretty much what's there. And obviously, make sure you tell people, what upgrades are going to be included, what support, and all that. And that's just kind of also a disclaimer that, that's what users are going to expect. If they're paying for a tool, they're going to expect some upgrades and support. And also consider bundling perhaps the tool with other tools or other authors, because sometimes people will release a little small tool that's kind of useful, and they'll say, oh, it's $5 or something. Well, $5 is nothing as far as payment, but it's a huge pain in the butt for people that work at a large company or work in the government, because there's a lot of paperwork that goes into buying tools or buying anything. So if you're going to make it one of those kind of real cheap tools, then maybe bundle it with some other stuff so that people can buy it more easily. And then if you're going to require payment, make sure you define what you mean by, non-commercial use or commercial use or whatever. And there's all sorts of things to consider. There's development and testing and internal use and consulting use and educational institutions, government entities, all this stuff. So you need to make sure you clarify what you mean by all those terms. And again, I recommend, don't disallow redistribution entirely. It's nice to, allow users to email it to their friends or other people they think might be users. And, and in the case that the website is gone forever, then let people redistribute it more widely. And again, make the source code available, regardless of whether it's a commercial product or not. Give people, the users, the source code and allow them to make modifications for internal use at least, and so they can, fix things. Allow users to distribute the modifications to one another. That if it's a commercial tool, maybe you should set up an internal type mailing list just for tool users, and that they can email stuff to each other. And if you're going to distribute the source code, obviously make sure it's complete. You've got all the build files and libraries and stuff like that. And just give a quick how-to of, hey, this is a Visual Studio project. This is how to compile it. And again, make the license clear, post it on the website. A lot of tools that I noticed that you couldn't figure out what the license was until after you've already downloaded the thing. Well, if it's a several megabyte file, then it's kind of a waste of time to have to download it just to figure out what the license is. And if you're going to release a news item or post something on a mailing list about the new tool that's available, just include a quick summary of, it's a GPL or it's free for non-commercial use or whatever. Include the copying or license file or something like that in the distribution. And in the online help, again, put a little summary there. And if you're going to go to a conference like DEF CON or Black Hat or whatever, tell people when you're presenting. And that's important so that people don't get all excited about something and then figure out that it's under some strange license. And just for the record, Black Hat and DEF CON are actually really good about that I don't think you're allowed to present tools at these conferences without it being free for at least the conference attendees. But not all conferences are like that. And that's just kind of the gist here. I'll go through this real quick is, make sure that if you're running a conference, you make sure that people know what the licenses are at least, and consider making it like DEF CON and Black Hat, that if you're going to present a tool, it has to be free for at least the attendees. And then the big one that I think we were talking about earlier is that if the people that run online forums, that's mailing lists or news groups or whatever, again, I'm not a lawyer, but I would think that you could come up with like a default license that, if stuff is posted to this mailing list without any other license attached, it's going to fall under this license. And I'd recommend making that, the BSD license or an MIT license. So something that basically says you can use it for whatever you want, don't sue me if it breaks something. And if people are going to patch or post patches to existing tools, then it probably makes sense to dual license those under the forums license and also the existing tools license, because if the person who wrote the original tool wants to incorporate that into their tool, then they can do that with no problem. And also you want to decide, are you going to let people post things under some different license? In particular, if people are making up their own license that doesn't allow redistribution, then mailing lists, archives, and stuff get screwed up. And then just, make it clear to members when they join the mailing list or on the website or for the web form or whatever, or in an FAQ that's what the license is. So that's all I have. Yes, go ahead. Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying there. I guess his second point was that some tools, especially very expensive tools, they don't want to post the price on their website because you can't just download it. You need to talk to them. You need to negotiate a contract. There's usually support that involves, but that's for tools that are in the thousands of dollars. I'm thinking about tools that are in the tens or hundreds of dollars. Well, again, it's like you got to define what you mean by that and all that. But yeah, there's a lot of, especially a lot of the security tools that we use, little command line things that shouldn't cost a lot of money. And what was your first point? You said something about cross-posting. Yeah, how do you determine who the original author is? Yeah, that's definitely a problem, that if stuff has been posted, especially if it's gone through like an anonymous remailer or something like that, or an email account that doesn't work anymore, yeah, sometimes you can't even figure out who the original author was. So I don't know how to fix that, but I'm hoping that maybe we can get some forward thinking into this, that in the future this won't be a problem if there is some sort of default license that things will fall under. But again, I'm assuming that can be done. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know. Any other comments or questions? We got a couple. We're done. Okay. Okay, well, thanks. If anyone else has any comments, see me.